What's an NSFW fact about history that we don't get to hear too often? There is a legal pen 15 size in Iceland. It's an old law from the Middle Ages after a woman was married off to a man and on her wedding night was so disappointed with how small his pen 15 was that she took him back to the church to have an annulment. Because of her, a law was made that a man must be at least 3 inches while hard to marry. There is a wonderful documentary called The Final Member in which this is an actual problem. If a man could not perform in bed during the Middle Ages, England, the wife could have her marriage annulled. But it had to be proved in the church courts. So midwives might be called to palpate his member to see if there was a medical reason for it, or prostitutes might be called for their expert knowledge. In ancient Egypt, soldiers proved their battle prowess by presenting the severed pen 15s of their slaughtered enemies. Traditionally, severed hands were presented, but in 1182 BC, Libyans and other allies invaded Egypt and were defeated by the army of Ramesses III, and Ramesses suspected that some soldiers were claiming extra credit by presenting the hands of women as well as the male soldiers. So he demanded pen 15s instead. His victory inscriptions mention 12,535 foreskins and hands, and has images of the piles of the body parts at the Medinet Habu mortuary temple. King Tut's first wife was his half-sister. But she also may have been his full sister and even at one point may have been his stepmother. Incest was actually encouraged in ancient Egypt as in many aristocracies to keep the bloodline pure. Moreover, if there were twins where one was a boy and one was a girl, they were married at birth because it was assumed that they must have banged in the womb. Roman troops were provided cow intestines condoms, as STD epidemics could decide the fate of entire wars. At the Temple of Aphrodite in Cyprus, overlooking the legendary birthplace of Aphrodite, young virgin girls would tie a bowstring around their head and await a man to come along and throw a silver coin of any value into their lap. The man would say, "I demand thee in the name of the goddess." The girl then had to have sex with the man. In this way the girl would make her first fruit offering to Aphrodite. It is said that some girls had to come back for many days before they were chosen. That would play hell with your self-esteem. In 1488 an Italian noblewoman Caterina Sforziario locked herself in a castle to save herself from her enemies. Her enemies managed to capture her children and threatened to hilt Gem if she wouldn't surrender. She climbed on ramparts, lifted her skirt to expose her female parts and shouted, "Fools! Don't you see that I can make myself more children?" There is a carving on the side of the belfry in Ghent that depicts a man suckling the breast of a woman. The story is that the man was condemned to die unless he could prove his innocence by surviving imprisonment without food for 40 days. He could have visitors during his imprisonment, but they of course were checked for food. His daughter visited him every day. She was a wet nurse. He was let go after 40 days having survived. There was a guy that tried to prove that yellow fever wasn't contagious, and so he would pour the infected vomit into his freshly cut opened wound, pouring it into his eyes, and drinking it. And soaking into a bath of it. And smearing his body with blood, piss, and spit. He was fine because yellow fever isn't spread through direct contact, it's spread through mosquitoes. So he did all that for nothing. His name was Stubborn Svirth, look it up. French modern philosopher Michel Foucault, in addition to studying crime and deviance in a criminology sense, also applied his theories on punishment to his fascination with BDSM, having also written a number of kink-based works. He eventually moved to San Francisco and partook in gay bathhouses, notorious for casual sex. He eventually caught HIV, and some have speculated, it may be written somewhere, that he purposely contracted it as some sort of poetic social commentary. Oddly, I learned this stuff while getting my administration of justice major and studying corrections, lol. The deadliest female serial killer in US history had murdered 35 people with an axe by the time she was 18 years old. Name? Clementine Barnabot, member of a cult called the Church of Sacrifice. Preferred murdering several family members at once, often decapitating them. Not so fun fact. She was out of prison before she was 30 and never seen again. I'd rather not know what her actual body count was. The dildo was created almost 1,500 years before the wheel. Priorities. Astronomer here. In 1992, two astronauts did not disclose they were married to NASA until it was too late to replace one of them, and this became the first married couple in space. While the two astronauts in question are not the kiss and tell types, most people assume this means SpaceX has happened. Obviously you don't have to be married to try it, but it does make it harder to figure out the couples. NASA's official stance is that it hasn't, but I'm not sure people really believe them. In ancient Egypt they held a fertility festival each year, and at this festival it was the pharaoh's responsibility to strip down and jerk AWF into the Nile. Edit. Should also mention that once the pharaoh had finished, men in the crowd were encouraged to step forward and join in. So once a year the Nile River literally tuned into a massive public circle jerk. According to their mythology, the Nile was created when one of the gods jerked off. It's a river of God spudge. Pope John XII was interesting. He became Pope in 955. His high points are: turned the sacred palace into a whorehouse, fornicated with, among others, his father's concubine, various widows, and even his own niece, castrated and then murdered a cardinal, blinded and then murdered his confessor, took payment for ordaining bishops, and even ordained a 10-year-old boy as a bishop, ordained a deacon in a stable, refused to make the sign of the cross, toasted the devil, invoked the names of pagan gods while playing dice, and when he lost, used money from the papal treasury to pay off his debts. Granted, he was a teenager when he became pope, thanks to his dad buying the office, but still. Back during the Age of Sail, sailors would go months and months without any women or any privacy. When they'd get to port, hundreds of prostitutes would take boats out to the ships to greet the sailors, who would almost all have sex with at least one. This included the ship's boys. Like I said, there was no privacy at all. The crew would share one huge room, dozens or hundreds of men sleeping in hammocks slung 28 inches apart. So the ensuing copulation took place in the wide open, hundreds of people having sex all over the ship in plain sight. This wasn't a rare thing. It was almost universal, though some more religious captains wouldn't let the prostitutes on board. STDs were therefore incredibly common. Side point: British sailors got a full ration of rum equal to 8 shots every day. If they were not long out of port, they got a full gallon of beer daily. When people complain about moral decay of society, it really just means to me that they don't know about history. Society is quite chaste today compared to much of the past. My dad was in the US Navy during Vietnam, stationed on an aircraft carrier. There was a group of prostitutes that followed the ship around wherever it took port. The prostitutes knew where the ship was going next before the sailors did. From the 13th to the 15th of February the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, Roman precursor of Valentine's Day, which was a festival of love and fertility. Priests would sacrifice a goat and then cut the goat skin into pieces. Part of this they would wear on their heads, and other parts were cut into thongs. The men would then run around the city of Rome naked, hitting as many women with these thongs as they possibly could. Being hit would help with pregnancy or becoming pregnant. So depending on what they wanted, the women would either deliberately stand in the way of the men, or try to run away while pretty much everyone was naked. In another part of the festivities, men would draw names of women from a jar, and the goal was that they'd stay together for the duration of the festival. This would often result in a lot of, intercourse, and sometimes people actually fell in love and got married after they met during Lupercalia. Read about Captain Cook. He discovered Hawaii. They docked offshore right at harvest time. The natives thought they were fertility gods and sent their women in canoes to the ship. The crew had a blast year after year, until the natives figured out what was happening. During wartime, some armies would wipe sheet on their spears so that when they stabbed/slashed enemies they'd get that extra poison damage. In medieval times, they would sling dead animals via catapult to spread disease, which was devastating in those times due to lack of proper medicine. It seems biological warfare was the world's actual first weapon of mass destruction. Edit. Thanks for Blobby Seal Award. Pope Alexander VI might have held orgies where he kept track of men's orgasms while he held the position of pope, and also definitely had an infidelity fetish, especially with women whose wedding he'd officiated. He had 4 kids with one married noblewoman, and at least another 3-5 outside of that. You know that one psychologist guy, Freud? Well, one time he was tasked with finding the testicles of an eel, so he got literally hundreds of eels so he could find their gonads. Nowadays we know eels have retractable testicles, but Freud didn't know that, so he cut up hundreds of eels looking for their testicles. All the documentaries you see about hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt neatly avoid showing you the fertility rites where the pharaoh's phallus is inseminating the land. Edit. This is my most upvoted comment on Reddit ever, and the stack of awards was totally unexpected. It's not that they have any material value, it does show a measure of appreciation, and I am humbled by your kindness. Thank you very much, all you wonderful people. There is a lot of seamen in Egyptian mythology. People just seem to ignore it. Horus and Set were at each other at all times. Apparently, according to prophecy, Horus would dethrone Set, to the point that they would try to prove their superiority by seeing who could get their semen inside the other. Set, somehow, got to have the butt sex with Horus, but, somehow, Horus dodged the shot at the end. Horus simply jerked off into Set's bowl of salad. In line with some of the other horrible stories here, when the Roman statesman Sejanus, the Emperor Tiberius' right-hand man, fell from grace and was executed, the Roman people were eager to take their revenge on his family as well for all the tyranny he had put them through. So they decided to kill his young son and daughter as well. There was no real issue about killing the boy, but when it came to the young girl there was a sudden outcry. It was against all precedent to execute an innocent young girl, and above that, deeply impious to put to death a virgin maid. So they had the executioner grape her first. Slave owners in the US had a health official who would lick slaves to see if their health was of good standing. Romans loved depicting sexual acts on many everyday items, like oil lamps, combs, bowls, etc. You often see images of people ducking, like porn but in daily life. So when Pompeii was first uncovered and the archaeologists were making their maps, Pompeii is our best guess for what an ancient Roman city looks like, as it and many of its inhabitants were captured in time. They decided that any buildings with big digs in front of them had to be brothels. Then they realized that if that was true, 90% of the buildings in Pompeii were brothels. The revised map found only a single brothel, differentiated from the phallically decorated dwellings by the presence of mosaics that served as a menu. Witches were more often mutilated than actually burned. Fun fact, none of the witches at Salem were burned at the stake. All were hanged and one man was crushed with stones. Shi Peipu was a Chinese opera singer turned spy active during the 1960s. He pretended to be a woman for 20 years to seduce a French embassy employee and obtain classified documents. His charade went so far as to fake a pregnancy and purchase a child and pretend it was theirs. He managed to fool everyone, including his lover, for over 2 decades before finally being exposed to the world. Edit. The rest of the story. Apparently, it caused a massive uproar in French media, like how could this possibly happen? The diplomat, Boursicotte, tried to slit his own throat, but failed. Both were tried, found guilty and imprisoned for espionage, but they were soon released because the leaked documents were not all that important. Shi Peipu returned to being an opera singer in Paris, enjoying his notoriety to gain fame, before dying in 2009 at the age of 70. Boursicotte is reportedly still alive in a nursing home in Brittany, and their son is living in Paris with his family. The Roman Empire drove extinct a plant that was a natural contraceptive. Its triangular leaves inspired the modern Valentine's Day heart shape. Imperial Japan was on some other shit, bro source. My great-grandfather was shot and killed in the Philippines by a Japanese soldier when he was fetching water for his kids, essentially making an orphan of my young grandfather. A friend of mine has this thing hanging on the wall in their house in memory of his great-uncle. Some sort of commendation. He was caught and accused of spying. He was definitely spying. By the Japanese. The document lists that when they found his body, he had been beaten, hands and feet burned off, eyes gouged out, bayoneted more than 20 times, and then buried. Crazy. That's some biblical shit. During the Rape of Nanking, there were accounts of Japanese troops forcing families to commit incestuous acts. Sons were forced to rape their mothers, and fathers were forced to rape their daughters. Before the widespread availability of abortion, mothers would often choose between infanticide, poison in the nipple, intentional smothering in bed or burying alive for instance, or abandoning the infant either in the woods or in public. This was generally less to hide indiscretions and more because they already had too many mouths to feed. Abandoning the child was considered to be the more guilt-free option. A mother who left their baby in the woods could comfort herself with the thought that maybe a woodsman found and decided to raise the child, for instance, although it almost certainly suffered and died of exposure. They could pretend for the rest of their life that their child was just fine out there somewhere. Men invented cages to go over a sleeping baby to prevent the mother rolling over and were surprised to learn this didn't help because so few cases were actually accidental. An interesting alternative popped up, which was foundling homes, which first came about in Italy during the Renaissance. This offered a tempting alternative to abandoning a child in nature. This was a home. However, it was an open secret that this option usually meant death. There weren't enough wet nurses to go around, and no formula meant that the death rate of these abandoned infants was above 90%. This was an open secret. Mothers knew the babies placed here would probably die, but it allowed them to ease their own conscience. The amount of babies abandoned per year in one foundling home in one city in Italy was in the thousands per year. But for these homes, it wouldn't be uncommon to find dead infants in trash heaps, on the street, or in a river, and the foundling homes did decrease this, but increased abandonment altogether. Some mothers even began abandoning their infants specifically to be hired into the foundling home as a wet nurse. The pay was too tempting. Keep in mind this was still the case well into the 1800s. It was believed Edward II of England was murdered by a red-hot poker up his ass. Not to NSFW, but a fun story regardless. In ancient Egypt around 570 BC, the situation for the Egyptian Empire is growing more and more grim. The current pharaoh Apries kept on losing important battles to the other expanding kingdoms and empires around Egypt. The population thus grew more and more discontent with his god status and started to lose faith in his ability to reign the country. Slowly but surely a group of usurpers started gathering numbers to eventually overthrow Apries. As an answer to this, he sent one of his best generals, Amasis, to beat down the potential rebellion before it would even break out. However, upon arrival, Amasis was convinced to join the cause of the rebellion. After not having heard back from his general in a while, Apries decided to inquire a bit further and eventually found out that Amasis had crossed him. Furious, he sent out a messenger to retrieve Amasis, who, in the meantime, had been elected the rebellion's leader. When the messenger, Ptolemy, arrived, this scenario played out. When Ptolemy came and summoned Amasis, Amasis, sitting on horseback, raised his leg and farted, telling the messenger to take that back to Apries. He went on to successfully dethrone Apries and became known as the last of the great kings of the late dynasty. One of my professors in college was Chinese born and alluded very vaguely to what had happened to her family during this time. She very diplomatically said, "There's a reason I will never buy a Toyota." Romans would rape the defeated army. That's actually been common throughout history, but few people want to talk about it. Men raping other men in war is nothing new. It was even encouraged by victors often to rape male prisoners of opposing armies, because they knew it would instill fear of getting caught and make the enemy army lose morale. If it seems like you're losing the war, will you run into its battle and give it your all and risk being caught and raped, or will you run the other way? Many people just run or commit suicide prematurely. In parts of Africa, to this day it's fairly common to rape male prisoners of war or enemies in general. This punishment is considered especially cruel because some men in these regions believes any act of homosexuality means their god won't accept them, and it makes them feel like they can't function as men in society anymore. Edit, typo. Benjamin Franklin had a fart fetish. There are letters that prove this, where he writes to a woman about her flatulence. Benjamin Franklin was also a emphatic fan of having sex with older women and would write letters to others recommending it. He said they had experience and enthusiasm. Edit, typo. Victor Hugo, the guy who wrote, among other things, Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was a sex addict. He claimed he and his wife had sex 9 times on their wedding night. When she got bored with this, and I don't blame her for that, it just all sounds way too much, he proceeded to go and bang everyone and everything that caught his eye. When he died, the brothels in Paris were closed down for the day so all the prostitutes could go and pay their respects to him. Fittingly, Paris apparently experienced a mini baby boom 9 months after his funeral, which 2 million people attended. 1984. During the Iraq-Iran War, Iraqi forces had laid hundreds of exposed electrical wires in the Mayun marshes which they knew the Iranians had to cross. Those wires were all snaked together and connected to large electrical generators. When Iran attempted to cross the marsh with boats, Iraq used just enough concentrated artillery to force the Iran soldiers out of the boats and walk through the marshland. As soon as that happened, the Iraqis fired up their generators and electrocuted thousands of Iranian soldiers in an instant. That's not the worst part. The Iraqis then sent in a road building detail and collected all of the Iranian dead and stacked the bodies like cordwood, 5 corpses high and 5 across, covering them with lime and then a bunch of sand. They used the Iranian dead to build a road for their trucks to cross the marshlands. The sheer hatred, madness and precision needed to pull this operation off, as well as carry it through, is just horrific to think about. The Romans would often include bestiality as halftime shows for their gladiator matches with strange animals up to and including swans. Are you not entertained? When Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of Henry VIII, was taken from Zion Abbey to the Tower of London to prepare for her execution, she sailed in a barge down the River Thames. She passed under London Bridge, where the severed heads of her alleged lovers Thomas Culpeper and Francis Derham were waiting for her, displayed on spikes, rotting and picked at by birds. There are disputed claims that both Napoleon I's and Rasputin's members were, well, dismembered during their respective autopsies and have traveled the world extensively, possibly farther than either men ever did, as well as being shown in multiple occasions to the public. On a similar note, it is well known LBJ had a massive Johnson, and Rasputin's Justhysklong was venerated amongst high-class women of his time. No wonder he's indeed Russia's greatest love machine. Zhang Zongchang, a Chinese warlord dubbed by Time as China's basest warlord, was nicknamed Old 86, which referred to either his height or the length of his pen 15, which was rumored to be as long as 86 Mexican silver dollars stacked together. He was also a poet. Case in point, you tell me to do this, he tells me to do that. You're all bastards, go duck your mother. Poem about bastards by Zhang Zongchang. There was also this one time during a famine where he visited a temple, and, instead of praying and offering gifts, slapped the temple's statue and said, "Duck your sister. How dare you make Shandong's people suffer by not giving us rain," then proceeded to order his artillery to shoot into the sky until it rained. It rained the next day. Edit, minor grammatical corrections. May have already been said, there are thousands of comments, but Pope Alexander VI threw a party that is referred to today as the Joust of Whores. He had a large number of women attend a banquet he was throwing, get naked, and would scramble to pick up chestnuts that the Pope and other people at the party threw at them. This party was followed by Alexander holding a contest to see who could sleep with the most women by the end of the night. During the whole thing his kids were also present. Alexander also liked watching his horses breed and would arrange for upwards of 100 horses put outside his palace so he could watch them for hours. Edit, I'm aware that Simonella made a video with this guy in it. He did not invent Alexander VI. I knew about him from AC2 and investigated further. In colonial America, a guy was arrested and charged because he drew a lewd image of his wife in the snow. Puritans didn't appreciate the art. More not school friendly than NSFW, but we learn the merry legend of Johnny Appleseed, who wandered around planting apple seeds wherever he went so apple trees would grow cause he loved apples so much. In reality, Johnny lived on the frontier and was pretty good about knowing where future settlements would crop up further west down the Ohio. He'd get there ahead of time, plant apple seeds to start a nursery of apple trees, fence it in and come back and tend it now and then. When people showed up, he would hire one of them to watch and tend the orchard for him and sell the apple trees to new settlers, stopping by occasionally to make sure everything was okay and get his cut of the money. The big thing they don't tell you in school is that apples that come from trees grown from seeds don't taste good. If an apple tree produces apples that taste good, at least back then, you grafted a piece of the tree into the ground to clone a new tree, not plant its seeds. So Johnny's usually probably tasted like shit. That didn't matter, however, because mostly what settlers wanted was apples to ferment into booze. Yep. Johnny planted apples so people could get liquored up. But you try telling truths like that to first graders and the school board suddenly gets all up in arms about promoting drinking and handing out apple mash to kids, and oh my god, Emma. Don't PM me, breasts, you're drunk right now. Aren't you? Not my fault that Billy couldn't hold his booze. And I'll be damned if I'm going to teach lies to kids just cause the man tells me I can't drink moonshine during planning period. Simone de Beauvoir was a French feminist author, professor, and Jean-Paul Sartre's kind of girlfriend. She was fired from her job in 1943 for abuse of minors. She had been seducing her underage female students for them to sleep with her and with Sartre, who had an appetite for vagines, and they wrote to each other making fun of these girls. Edit. I am happy to see a lot of people asking for sources and providing nuance in the comments. Do not hesitate to check them out. I answered some of them. I wrote a 10-page paper about Sartre's life and work and didn't see this fact. Do you have a source on that? Because now I want to know what I missed. It happened on the 11th page. Anne Frank's diary was censored for her privacy. She wrote many entries about masturbation and her bisexuality. Her father cut those out. Surprised but not surprising. Canadians were very brutal towards the Germans during the First World War. They exploited the trust out of them by throwing cans of meat in their trenches. When the Germans asked for more, they threw hand grenades instead. They were also known for killing the wounded and surrendered Germans. One case had a Canadian soldier slipping a live grenade into a German POW, killing him. They also were the most enthusiastic users of poison gas on the Western Front. They pretty much gassed anything that moved, if they had the chance. Some estimates that 1.90% of the gas attacks were caused by Canadians. During night trench raids, Canadian would make their faces black, wore thick dark gloves and used meat cleaver, push daggers, trench clubs with nails embedded and other homemade weapons on the Germans. In the 19th century, women were prescribed cocaine tampons to relieve pain from menstrual cramps. Drukpa Kunli, the Buddhist missionary into Bhutan and one of the country's most famous historical figures, was famous for enlightening women with his big dig. He was known for his crazy methods of enlightening other beings, mostly women, which earned him the title the Saint of 5,000 Women. Among other things, women would seek his blessing in the form of sex. His intention was to show that it is possible to be enlightened, impart enlightenment, and still lead a very healthy sex life. Because of this power to awaken unenlightened beings, Kunli's pen 15 is referred to as the thunderbolt of flaming wisdom, and he himself is known as the fertility saint. For this reason, women from all around the world visited his monastery to seek his blessing. Some of his most famous performances include urinating on sacred thankas, stripping down naked, or offering his testicles to famous lama. He is one of very few Buddhist teachers to almost always appear in Bhutanese paintings topless. It is known that Drukpa Kunli would not bless anyone who came to seek his guidance and help unless they brought a beautiful woman and a bottle of wine. His fertility temple, Chimil Hakhang, is today filled with the weaved portable wine bottles. Catherine the Great is rumored to have died of having sex with a horse. This isn't true. She had a stroke on the toilet like a normal person. She did, however, have, well, quite the appetite, let's just say. She took a pretty long series of lovers and loved sex so much she had a bunch of pretty raunchy furniture made. She liked herself some big dig, and some of the stuff she had made was extremely X-rated. She also gave no sheets about status when it came to her men, and would gladly boink a peasant if she met a low status dude that struck her fancy. All told, this was also a pretty good deal for anybody who she fancied. She'd usually elevate the guy to the nobility and set him up financially. She would of course eventually get bored of her lovers, but also didn't really hold any malice toward exes. It usually ended with what amounted to nothing personal: "I'm just tired of you, have some land and money, then go away." Her rule is considered a Russian golden age, and life got better for absolutely everybody in Russia at the time. Generally when history covers her, it covers her long, successful rule and not her shameless love of big dig.